the board, you mean? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay with me. They hit it. I'm not. I'm not seeing me on Facebook. Do you? Damn. 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 It is. It's close enough. I'm good. Okay, let's hope Nicolee Biddle calls in 7 minutes. We'll wait a couple minutes before we start. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Man. Wasn't Zoe? And it's 8 o'clock on Thursday night, and this is the 24th installment of the Age Out Angels Radio Hour. My name is Greg Rapport. I am the founder and executive director of Age Out Angels. We are a 501c3 nonprofit corporation that provides one-to-one mentors to youth who are in need. This program is brought to you every week at this same time, courtesy of Doc G and the fine people here at Hamilton Radio, who allow us to use this airtime. Doc G is our engineer tonight. Robin's at the big board as well. I want to talk more about some topics we've been discussing in previous weeks. I want to talk more about how cell phones need to be viewed differently by those of us in positions of authority. I want to talk more about the challenges faced by youth living in group homes. Definitely want to talk more about the opioid epidemic and what you can do to let the Sackler family know they are the scum of the earth. You'll remember that Sackler family are the ones who actually started the whole epidemic by essentially lying to the prescribing doctors. But we may have to put some of those issues on hold for a little while tonight, because when our guest calls in, I don't want to take a single moment away from her. Her name is Nicolee Biddle, and she is representing the National Foster Care Youth and Alumni Policy Council. Nicolee will be here to tell us about a study the council recently conducted titled Preventing Unnecessary Removal of Children from Their Families. This is really intense stuff, and I think this is just going to be an incredibly insightful and eye-opening show tonight for all of you out there who aren't a part, you know, of the child welfare system. Everyone's talking about this right now. You know, part of this is actually being driven by the fact that the opioid epidemic is stressing the child welfare system to the breaking point. And so they kind of have to look at alternatives now. For my part, I'd like to see some kind of an understanding of the balance regarding the amount of trauma experienced by children when adults make the decision whether or not to remove them from their biological homes. It's a hot button issue. And there's always kind of a balance there, because a child is in a home and they may be being abused or neglected. And if they are, they're experiencing trauma. And then that trauma gets multiplied when they get yanked out of the only environment that's ever been familiar to them. And I believe that this group, called the National Foster Care Youth and Alumni Policy Council, really has their fingers on the pulse of this issue. And so I hope to hear from them in just a few minutes, and look forward to sharing their insights with you. So no other call-ins tonight, please. I want to keep the line open for Nicolee. But you can feel free to write your comments and questions in the comments field on my Facebook page. You can go to my Facebook page if you're not there already, Greg Rapport, and I'll be happy to pass your questions and comments along to our guest tonight, or just respond to them myself. Reminder to our listeners, on February 22nd, our guest will be Jamira Moore, co-founder of the My Life movement. And on March 1st, we have acupuncturist Kristen Gray Apple lined up. Moving along after that, on March 8th, we have the first of 3 consecutive pre-recorded shows. And my guest in the March 8th pre-recorded show will be Zoe Brooks from the Trenton Circus Squad. And I can tell you, we've already taped that show, and it's absolutely fantastic. She is a wonderful guest. So with that in mind, please, if you're tuned into me, especially on Facebook right now, please tell your friends to tune into this program right now. Do it now and help me spread the word. Internet radio is indeed the future. And, I'm thinking in the next 5 years, people will be listening to internet radio in their cars. And the dialogue exchange on shows like this one will involve people with opinions on a global level. It'll be people chiming in from all around the world. This extensive outreach ability gives us the power to develop mentoring services for youth anywhere. We just need your help to spread the word. And by the way, while I'm on the subject of developing mentors anywhere, I could use a little help in Chattanooga, Tennessee right now. So if anyone is out there in that area who would like to help us out with some young people who are in need, please get in touch with me right away. So if you think about all the like totally garbage reasons people use social media, this right here, this is it. This is what social media was intended for, to do some good, to pull people together, to help each other. So together, you and I, we can use social media to improve the lives of children. And it actually requires very little effort on your part. So do it right now. Hit that share button on Facebook. Hit that button and tell your friends to share with their friends, and on down the line. Let's get this ball rolling. And while you're doing that, I'd like to remind everyone that our theme music comes to us courtesy from Kurt Seldamridge, operator of the Cave Rehearsal Recording Space in Pennsylvania. If you have recording or rehearsal needs, you can get in touch with Kurt by emailing to thecave1876@gmail.com. And I'd also like to give a shout out to Marty Light, who donated his time and is playing a tremendously sweet bass on the music track that you just heard. So once again, please, no other call-ins tonight. Waiting to hear from Nicolee Biddle, but feel free to write your comments and questions on my Facebook page, and I'll be happy to pass them along. So while we're waiting for Nicolee, I want to talk a little bit about smartphones and see if you'd like to tell me your opinions about that. If I don't have time to get to all of our comments this week, I promise I'll revisit them next week, because I have a feeling this is going to be an ongoing conversation. The basic etiquette we believe to be true about cell phones characterizes their use as essentially rude and disruptive. And that's something that I happen to disagree, and I'm going to stop right there because I noticed there's a call coming in. Hi, caller. Are you on the line?
Hi, this is Nicolee Biddle.
Nicolee, thank you so much for calling in. It's good to hear your voice. Is the show playing in the background where you are? Because I can hear it.
Yeah, I just muted it.
Okay, if you can mute it, that would be great. So, Nicolee, welcome to the Age Out Angels Radio Hour. It's so good to have you here.
Great. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. And so, the name of the group you're representing is the National Foster Care Youth and Alumni Policy Council, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And now, do you have like a title with that group? Are you a member of the executive council? How does that work?
So what it is that the council is part of, it's a partnership between 3 different organizations. And so there are some older advocates who kind of run and oversee things. We call them the back office. And then all 20 of us are the front office. So no one, all of us with all of our different experiences are considered to be equal.
Okay. And so there's no like titles and stuff, right?
No, there's no titles on the council itself.
Just back office and equals.
Yeah, our back office support and then our equals.
That's funny. Back office is how we used to talk about technology in the day. I think that's interesting. Now you personally, you not only talk the talk, you walk the walk, because you are actually a product of the foster care system. Is that correct?
Yes, that is true.
Is it okay to say it that way? I mean, I think really our listeners need to understand the nomenclature of child welfare. Yes. Is it acceptable to say that you are a product of the system?
I would say that I'm a product of more than the system. So I would say even though it's maybe not the best term, we like to use the term alumni, saying that it's something that we experienced and graduated from.
Ah, so you're an alumni of the system. I like that so much better. And you were in the system for 7 years, is that correct?
Yes, I was in the system for 7 years from the time I was 14 until I was 21.
Okay. And so at 21, is that when you aged out?
Yes.
Okay, so what state were you in when you aged out, that it wasn't 18?
I was in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So Pennsylvania has had extended foster care since about 2008, I believe.
Okay. So may I ask, and you don't have to answer because this is a personal question, but when you aged out at 21, had your caseworker prepared you with a proper sort of transition plan?
So my age out journey was a little bit different. I went straight to college. I was in a kinship placement, but it was just guardianship that happened. So the court was still active until I was 21. And so I was actually in my junior year of college. And so it was a pretty hard transition because whenever I turned 21, you lose that stipend that you have.
Yeah.
And, I don't feel that I was adequately prepared to really do adult things at that point.
Sure.
I was in college and where I was at maybe developmentally, I was probably, 18, 19 years old, even though I was 21. And so it was definitely a steep learning curve for me at that point that I've learned a lot from.
Yeah,
but it was hard.
We meet a lot of people at Age Out Angels who, are in the system for a while, age out, and they're in college, right? But then, like a summer break or a semester break or something like that happens, the stipend is gone, and they find out that they're not welcome to come back to that house that, was where they grew up in, essentially. So they find themselves sort of homeless for the first time, at the age of 21 and in the middle of college semesters. We meet a lot of people who sort of fall into that category. And it's, it can be difficult, but we do our best to help them out. So can you tell us the purpose of the council?
Yes. So the National Foster Care Youth and Alumni Policy Council is the product of a partnership between, it's funded graciously through Casey Family Programs, which is a powerhouse funder in the world of child welfare. And
Casey Programs we refer to that as the mothership.
Yes, yes, and we are one of their many benefactors. And so we also function through a partnership with Foster Care Alumni of America as well as Foster Club. And so between these 3 partners that we have, you have to be elected by somebody or nominated by somebody to become a member of the council. And then you have to fill out the full application and, you know, answer a lot of questions and talk about kind of where you are in your life. And then there is a review process, and then you're either, you know, when you're selected to serve as a member on the council, then you are among about 20 of your other peers from various places across the nation. And what happens is that we meet every year in person at least one time. And during that meeting, we work on our priorities because it's very important we educate and we advocate, but we do not lobby for specific legislation necessarily.
Right.
Which is a very important distinction.
That's right.
And so what we do is we get together, and before that in-person meeting, we have a chance to work through the internet and through phone to really we have a lot of conference calls monthly, and even more than that whenever it gets closer to our meeting, where we develop what it is that we want to say, how we want to say it. We designed the whole survey that we disseminated to come up with these recommendations and these priorities. We did all of that over the phone and through various Google Docs.
So basically, I just want to go back for 1 second to make sure that our listeners understand that there are three basic sort of mandates. One is to educate, one is to inform, one is to analyze. But one of those is not to lobby for legislation. So, and also I want to mention that Casey has joined our conversation. Casey, feel free to write your notes there in our comments field. It's great to have you aboard. So you get together as a council. Now, of the 20 or so members who are in the council, is it important that everyone has actually been in the foster care system? Is that a qualification?
Yes, it is. So every single person who is a member of that council has experienced the child being in the foster care system at some point in their lives. There are some who were adopted. There were many who aged out. And there are a few, I should say, who were actually reunified. And so we're a mix of a bunch of different experiences. Some experienced congregate care or group homes or residential facilities. Some experienced kinship like me. Some were in more traditional non-relative foster homes. So there's a whole mix. There's a very diverse mix in all of our experiences, but all of us are really unified and connected by the fact that we all experience some type of time in the foster care system.
Well, you know what's funny is that, you know, young people say, you know, we need you to listen to us because adults are making decisions for them and they're doing it without listening to them. And as adults, you know, I sit around a lot of various conferences and things like that on child welfare, and we all sit around and we say, we really need to listen to the youth. That's what we need to do. And here you are, actually going outside of your council to conduct polls, right? And find out. And so, you know, when I sent notices around tonight to people saying you should listen to this show tonight, you know, basically one of the things that I said was, you said you wanted to listen, you know, and here these youth have spoken. So, you know, let's sort of hear what they have to say. But getting back for just a second to the process. So you go outside of the council. Once you decide on a topic, you go outside of the council to conduct a poll, right?
Yes.
And the people you poll are also 100% who experience foster care in one way or another, yes?
Yes, and so those can be, just as with the council, those could be people who are still in foster care. So on the council, we have had a few that are in extended foster care, so over 18, but are still technically considered in care, right? So it's the same with our survey. We send it to our peers, you know, those who are currently in foster care, as well as those who have experienced foster care and who would be considered alumni.
And how many people responded to this report survey?
To our survey, we had 209 current and former foster youth, and they were, for the most part, within the age range of 10 years old to 21 years old. So we had quite a turnout. One thing that is hard, it's actually pretty difficult to engage the foster care population in some of this type of research.
Sure.
Because, you know, I mean, it's hard. It's tell me your story. and not everybody is ready to do that or able to do that. And so, so getting 209 former and current foster youth to complete our survey, I think, was a huge accomplishment for the council.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I run up against this all the time. I say, you know, come on the show and tell your story. And people will just say to me, you know, it's nobody's business. You know, it's my personal business. It's not everyone's business. And the other thing is, why do you make me want to relive like what's possibly the worst time of my life? You know, why would you make me want to do that? And of course, you know, my answer to that is you don't have to. I don't want to traumatize you again. But there are a lot of people who are listening to this show who don't know. I mean, this is what goes on in the foster care world is one of the best kept secrets. It's unbelievable how this has been, you know, clouded from view, and little by little. And I think you guys are just so fabulous because the fact that you've been in the system. I mean, that you have automatic credibility. And so this most current report is called Preventing Unnecessary Removal of Children from Their Families. And was there anything specific that made you choose that, or did it just get the most votes at the annual meeting?
So coming up with our priorities, and we presented on two, and this is one of them. This was the one that I advocated really hard for, because in many of my peers, I think once they heard about it, they were like, oh my God, me too. Right. And so what we found is that many of us felt like, you know what, if things would have been in place or things would have been done differently, maybe I wouldn't have had to been in foster care. Maybe I wouldn't have had to age out. And so what we found is that that's something that has happened, and many of us still work within the field, and these are things that are still happening, you know, 10, 15, 20 years down the road. Mm-hmm. And we know that there are things being done for prevention, but sometimes people who work in the field get so stuck in the things that we've been doing for 20 and 40 and, you know, 200 years that we forget to look outside the box. And prevention is something that makes perfect sense whenever you hear about it. But when you talk about ways to do the prevention, I think it scares people. It kind of throws them off their game.
Absolutely true.
Because,
I'm sorry, you go ahead.
No, that's okay. It's because it's so different. You know, it's just a very different frame of mind when you come from a prevention standpoint for foster care as opposed to a reactionary approach to foster care.
And I think as you go through this report with me in about 10 seconds, people are going to see how some of it just makes pure common sense. Other parts of it, you have to think a little bit outside of the box to really wrap your head around. And I want to get to all of it. So basically, when you did this report, you were able to isolate 6 priorities. And I want to talk about each one of them, and I want to expand on each one of them. So now, tell us, what was priority number 1?
So priority number 1 is to engage with us during the investigation and when developing prevention services for our families.
Okay, so basically, use the children as a resource.
Yes, particularly whenever you have older youth who are entering the system. You know, even and older is relative, right? There are 10-year-olds who can tell you exactly what's going on in their home.
Sure.
But what our survey found is only 41% of our young people reported having been included in the investigation prior to their placement in foster care. Mm-hmm. So that's less than half.
So,
go ahead.
And they probably aren't like sort of kept abreast of the progress either. It's just they're in the house and then they're out of the house, sort of, with no real explanation or understanding along the way. I hear that a lot. There were 2 percentages, 59% and 55%. Do you remember what those were?
Yes. So 59. So this is the opposite of that. So less than half were included, which means 59% of those who we surveyed were not included. So way over half. And then 55% didn't feel confidently in their child welfare professionals' commitment of keeping their families together. And so those are the specific stats we have, but what kind of ties them together is that most people in our survey were able to identify the challenges within their family. So they were able to say, yeah, this is what was wrong in my family. This is what needed fixed. And they didn't know the services that were out there, being children. But they also felt like if they would have been asked, then that's where their child welfare professional would have come in and said, oh, well, this is something that might help.
We were talking about,
and that's,
what age, should a child really be given serious consideration. And one of the members of your team, who's the gentleman who was on that panel of
yes,
your women?
David.
Yes. Oh, and he said something that I thought was really astute. He said that the question should never be, should I involve the child? The question should always be, how can I involve the child? So it's sort of at any age level, there is a way to reach out to children, to make them feel like they're part of the discussion, to make them feel like, to make them feel like how they feel matters. And I think that's really critical. So let's move on. Let's move on to number two. Number two priority is, I love this one. This is so scary. This is so scary. Don't use our removal as a way to punish our parents.
Yeah. So
talk
that's
about that.
Something, that's a loaded one because people, nobody wants to think that happens, but indirectly it does happen. And the way that happens is because what we hear in our own stories and what we see happening is that children are being removed because their parent misses a drug screen, or they aren't able to attend an appointment. And that is something that happened to me, and that is something that happened to many of the young people that we surveyed. There were people who were removed from their family because their caregiver missed an appointment, even though there wasn't necessarily a true safety risk.
Right.
Right. And the caveat to that is, well, what determines a safety risk, right? And we'll get into that in the next one. But
sure. But I can think of 10 reasons why a person might miss an appointment. I mean, while the people who are making the decisions are sort of following the numbers, I think frequently what's not taken into consideration is, people who live in maybe, less than stellar circumstances, but have jobs, are holding on to those jobs in a very precarious way. And they can't maybe just stop and not come to work because they have to go to a particular place or a court or something like that on a given day. There's so many reasons, to miss something. Transportation is my biggest pet peeve that sort of comes to mind. And then the way you expand on it, which is, what if a person, fails a urine test or something like that? Does the child have a home? Is the child fed? Are their basic needs being met? To then
right.
yank the child, right?
Right. And so one of the youth quotes that we had here was that from one of our young people was that his family may not have had the luxuries other families had, but that didn't mean he wasn't taken care of. Right. His family was made of a single parent mother on disability, but his basic emotional, educational, and basic needs were being met. But in spite of that, he was still removed. And I think you said it very well. There's such a conglomerate of factors here. If you're trying to hold on to a job, but then you have to go to your drug and alcohol appointment, your mental health appointment, your visits with your kids, your drug and alcohol, your random urine screens that you don't know when they're happening, then you lose your job, and then you really don't have a way to pay your bills, and then you become homeless, and then you can't have a car or get to any of your appointments, and so there are just so many compounding factors. It's the way it is now, it's seen as a very cut and dry yes or no situation, and that's really not the reality.
Absolutely, absolutely, and who suffers? You know,
The children,
the children suffer.
and this the whole family, but but especially the children in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. So number three sort of piggybacks onto number two, doesn't it?
It does. It does. So number three was we shouldn't be removed because of the way one worker views our family. So, for instance, a lot of people in our survey shared stories regarding different standards of removal. And what we found in our research is that there is, you can be removed for basically three things. For experiencing founded abuse, which is many different types, experiencing founded neglect, or what they call imminent risk. Now, the thing about imminent risk is that it's the federal government defines it as the standard which must be met for removal, but that standard itself is not defined. And so what you have is that you might have two families that look the same on paper, but those families have two different caseworkers. And those two families, or those families have the same caseworker and they have two different judges. And so because of those different people, we found that children are being removed based on the differences in how these different people are defining the imminent risk.
Right.
And so what we are saying is that we need clearly defined tools and assessments to determine an imminent risk that will take out some of that human guessing and some of that human error, so that they reflect, they reflect the differences in family members, race, gender, sexuality, income, disability, substance abuse, mental health, immigration, or citizenship status. That's something that takes into account all of these things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That standard that is not clearly defined can be different, I would think, from moment to moment, court to court, situation to situation. Let's move on to number four. Let's move on to number four because I love this one. Educate child welfare professionals about the importance of prevention services. And the thing about this that just grabs me is that there are probably several people who impact a child's case, who are not necessarily like a caseworker or somebody like that who's supposed to be trained on this kind of thing. There's judges, court workers, police, possibly, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how do you see this happening?
So what we would like is that we would like for child welfare professionals must be educated about available preventative services that are available before a child is removed. So an example of this would be the home visiting program that was just reauthorized for another 5 years of funding, which is great. But that's a resource that can be put in place without a child entering foster care. It's something that's completely funded independently. And so that's something that those in the child welfare world might not necessarily think of, but would be crucial to preventing a child entering foster care. And we also believe that professionals should all be consistently educated on substance abuse, mental health, attachment, and childhood trauma. And these trainings should include a youth and family perspective. And so what we found is that one of our council members, actually, who was reunified, he would go back and he would lead trainings with his birth mom for caseworkers and for CYF professionals in his state. And every time, he said, he would have people come to him and say how invaluable having him there was, because it really put things into perspective for them and helped them to kind of rethink things.
Sure.
So and what happens a lot of times is that there will be training, one day. You have one day of training on mental health, and then you might not have anything.
Right. Goodness. Number 5 is substance abuse and mental health crises are tearing our families apart.
Yes. They are.
Yes, they
They
are.
are. So that is where things like the opiate crisis comes to mind. And what
Yes.
what we found is that 51% of our youth in our survey identified family struggles with mental health challenges, and 48% identified family struggles with substance abuse prior to entering foster care. And so the most recent data we have nationally from the AFCARS report for 2016 is that about 34% of the entries into foster care were due to parental substance abuse. And that's something that keeps getting bigger. And there are experts that actually believe that that is very underestimated.
Sure.
And so what we're advocating is that substance abuse and mental health status should never be the sole reason for removing a child from their home. Because just because a parent is using substances or has a mental health diagnosis doesn't mean that they're, necessarily abusing or neglecting their children just because they have that. And what we also found is that there were many of our young people who said that they had these problems before child welfare got involved, and there were actually investigations into their homes, but services weren't put into place there. And so it ended up escalating until the abuse did start to occur. And then at that point, services were finally given to their family, but the children were removed. So it became this kind of missed opportunity. And that's definitely something that happened for my personal story there. So for me, a quote that we got in our research is from a young man in Arizona's foster care system, and he felt that child welfare limited his parents' abilities to succeed. His dad had to appear at the court weekly and had to have weekly drug testing, but there was no transportation, and the area was too big to walk to and from appointments, and that's in Arizona. And so I'm in Pennsylvania, and my story is eerily similar to that. And I'm not in a very rural area. But there's still a lack of transportation that wasn't taken into account. And so by placing all of these, by removing the children and then placing all of these expectations and all of these hoops basically to jump through, it really kind of set everybody up for failure.
Absolutely. So how do you want these issues to be handled? Like, what do you want them? Do you want them to provide like Uber in that kind of a situation? Is that what you're hoping for?
We do. So we think that there are many creative solutions. I think that we have to be very creative in the world of child welfare because there are limited resources. And so one of those things would be using things like telemedicine. So you can see a doctor over the internet these days. And we realize that, the internet itself maybe is not everywhere either. But that's one way that we can reach some people, for some people to attend their appointments through, Skype or through the phone.
Well,
and
see, that's thinking outside of the box, isn't it? That's exactly what we were talking about in the beginning. Welcome to 2018.
Right. Well, I know my county provides bus passes and bus tickets, but if the bus stop is 2 miles from your home and it's all uphill, that's quite a hike, right? If you're a recovering addict, or let's say if you have schizophrenia, is that really realistic? And so that's where we say, hey, let's use Uber, let's use Lyft, let's, carpool, let's do something, rather than writing it off as non-compliance. Some of the other things that we've said that we would advocate for are, again, using things that maybe aren't tied to child welfare, like that home visiting program I mentioned earlier, that can really be helpful. There's also something out there that is called family-based substance abuse treatment. And it is something that is quickly expanding across the United States. But what it is it's an intensive family-based intervention where the parent or parents actually live together with their children in a controlled home or facility. And while they're in that facility, which is meant to feel homey and meant to mimic a home setting, they are getting comprehensive mental health services, comprehensive drug and alcohol services. and so are their children if they need them, and everything is in one place, and the family is still together.
Right.
And I think that's a huge game changer, especially with the opioid epidemic, because whenever you have these really, really little children, especially, they really need that time to be able to connect and learn how to attach to people. And so keeping kids with their families during those times can be so crucial if it is possible. And it's not going to be possible everywhere, and we know that, but we think it's more possible in more scenarios than we've seen things being used.
Right. You are very acutely aware of the fact that some children just have to be taken out of a situation where they're in danger.
Yeah.
But what you're asking is for, you know, that danger to be assessed appropriately, and drastic action to not be taken if it really isn't a requirement. You know, if the child is getting those first basic needs met of having food and shelter and clothing, and maybe providing some services for the family, which brings us to number 6, which is to connect our family to services. Here's a key: before we might be removed from our family. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yes. So that goes to what I mentioned earlier, where many of our families, including my own, as well as a lot of the other council members, had investigations into their family for abuse and neglect before they were actually removed. But what would happen is that CYF comes in, they do an investigation, and then they don't, nothing's founded. And so there isn't an imminent risk isn't deemed. There isn't a founded occurrence of abuse or neglect. And so a lot of times services just kind of leave.
Well, you get
nothing happens.
Yeah, in that situation, you get nothing. Yeah.
Or the cops come, and sometimes now some of the mandated reporting laws have changed, but in some cases, CYF isn't even notified. If they come for a domestic violence encounter, or if they come for something else, CYF isn't being involved. But fast forward months and months later, or a year later, and now CYF is involved because there was a founded occurrence of abuse or neglect. So now a child has been hurt, when really there was some involvement before the child was hurt, but there weren't enough services, or there weren't any services provided, or there wasn't enough oversight. It's here, call this number, and then you just kind of hope they call that number and never contact the family again.
Right.
So that's really hard.
How often do they call that number? It probably not really all that frequently.
Right. Well, our caseworkers are swamped. They're overworked and underpaid. And so, we have to be realistic here of what is possible.
Speaking of this, I actually have a 6A that I'd like to present to you for your approval, because what I would like to see is a continuum of care. You're talking in number 6 about allowing the family to access services before the child is removed, but I'd like to see a continuum of care where, once it's established that a family needs services, that care continues on through, because what I've seen too many times is that on the other side of a case, where a case is closed and a family may be getting certain services, they may be getting mental health services or substance abuse services, but then it reaches the point where it's deemed okay, and the case is closed, and so with the closing of that case, the services just abruptly cease.
Yes, that's actually that's part 2 of our number 6.
Oh, is that part 2 of number 6?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yes. So we had a part 2. So the full priority is connect our families to services, even when we are not removed from our family, and after we have been reunified with our family. And you're exactly right. We preach engagement in services for families, and we hound them and we keep on them that these services are necessary. You need them. And then whenever their case is closed, the funding stops, and so they can't access those services anymore. And so it's really kind of backwards. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It's ironic.
Well, it just sets them up to fail again, It
does.
Yeah.
And many people end up cyclically back into the CYS system. So, you know, I was reunified, and then I entered again 3 years later.
You did?
You know, I did not, but we heard that coming from youth in our survey, and we had that come a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. So, listen, I just want to take a short break for 1 second, okay? And I'll come back to you in just a minute. I do need to take a moment and thank all the people who made donations to Age Out Angels this week. We thank you very much for your donation. And remember, not just during the holidays, but every time you make a purchase from Amazon, you could be making a donation to Age Out Angels without spending a penny more. You heard correctly. You can make a donation to Age Out Angels without spending a penny more, because you know when you go to Amazon, Amazon always gives you a pop-up window that offers you a chance to go to Amazon Smile. And if you make your purchase through Amazon Smile, you can designate Age Out Angels as your donation organization. And without it costing you more, a portion of your purchase will go to help children who need it the most. And if you want to friend me on Facebook, I can make it very easy for you. I can send you a link that will take you directly to our designation page on Amazon Smile, and save you the trouble of trolling through the probably 1,000 organizations that you'd have to go through. Although I found that Age Out Angels really shows up high in alphabetical order, so it might not be that hard. But friend me on Facebook, and I'll make it easy for you. So back to Nico Lee from the National Foster Care Youth and Alumni Policy Council. Nico Lee, is this your only job, or do you have like a day job?
I have a day job. I actually recently passed my licensed clinical social worker exam. So I work as a licensed trauma therapist in Pennsylvania. And I do this kind of on the side, just because I think it's really important. And that's pretty much all of the other members of the council as well. We have lawyers, we have people who are just starting out and who are in college. We have people who are actively working in the field of child welfare. Most of us actually are working in the field of child welfare in some capacity. So it's a lot of work, but it's a privilege to do.
Is it something when you were growing up and you know in the system, were you thinking I'm definitely going to head this direction? This is a give back for me.
No.
Okay. You were pre-med?
To be quite frank. Yes. So I didn't start embracing the fact that I had experienced the child welfare system until about 2 or 3 years ago. And then once I started, I couldn't stop. But it really took a lot of time for me to be comfortable disclosing that about myself. And it really took me, it's definitely a finesse to balance being a professional in the child welfare field while having some experience in the child welfare field too, because there are things about child welfare that can't be taught. Right.
I mean, you seriously have learned it from the inside out. I get told sometimes, and I've heard this from more than one source, that frequently if you ask a child who is in the system what they want to be when they grow up, they will say one of like 4 or 5 professions, and it's the ones that they come in contact with, you know, social worker, judge, lawyer, because there are very few other professions that are actually being modeled for them. You know, they're not,
right.
You know, they don't have parents who are business people or corporate workers or engineers.
Right. Well, I definitely can speak to that a little bit. I did know I wanted to be a therapist, and had I not been in child welfare, I don't think I would have wanted to be a therapist. I actually think I would have tried to be on Broadway, to be honest with you. So I think you're right there.
Well, being on Broadway is a real tough nut to crack. So
yeah. So maybe I made it. It was all meant to be, right?
I think you're helping a lot more people this way. What do the other people on the council do? Do they have real jobs? What are they doing?
Yes, they do. So we've had two lawyers who actively work with child welfare in or around the child welfare system. We have people who work at child welfare agencies as program managers or even just as caseworkers themselves. We have other people we have one who ran for office in his hometown and got almost 40% of the vote, which was a huge accomplishment, being
Wow.
a young 21.
Sure.
So we have a lot who are still in college and who are going for, we have a lot of people who are aspiring to get their Master of Social Work or their Bachelor in Social Work. And we have some who are we have one who's doing music and who's doing things with that on top of kind of a political major. So we have a whole slew of diversity.
So generally what we're talking about here are people who have been in the system and whose outcome revolves around productivity. And what we hear so frequently is that this alarming number of people who are in the system whose outcomes are negative. And I
Right.
and I presume, when you get right down to it, the umbrella of what it is that your council is trying to do is reverse that trend and take those people who are experiencing those negative outcomes starting from the time they are in early childhood, and try to put them in an environment where they won't suffer quite the same level of trauma that kids may be suffering unnecessarily, the way the system kind of works now. Now, when you do a report like this, you're not lobbying for legislature or anything like that. So your clout sort of stops at the end of the report. Am I correct? And what we're trying to do now, and I'll tell you, I'm gonna help this to with the absolute best of my ability, with every ounce of energy I have, to spread the word about what you've come up with here.
Yeah. So what we do, we presented, we meet annually with the commissioner for the Administration on Children and Families, and we were able to meet with the director of the Children's Bureau. We were also able to meet with, these are all federal stakeholders, so they're not the legislators themselves, but they're the people in the administration. So we also met, we shared these priorities with the Maternal Child and Health Bureau. That's part of the Health Resources and Services Administration. So we're sharing these and we're kind of following up with them, and we're sharing them within our networks, but it's definitely, it's not specific legislation. And so there is only so much we can necessarily do with it. So any way that you plan on sharing and supporting this and getting our message out would be great.
Well, I think this report is absolutely brilliant. Now, can people go to your website and access previous reports and things that you've done on this subject?
They can. We have a website. It is www.nationalpolicycouncil.org. We also have a Facebook page, facebook.com/National Policy Council. And we have priorities listed. Our website is getting an update, I have to say, so
Okay.
kind of bear with us there. But we have currently 10 posted priorities in addition to the prevention one, and as well as our most recent one, which was on social capital for youth. But we have priorities on normalcy, vulnerability, well-being, homelessness, crossover youth, so youth involved in juvenile justice, mental health, and child welfare, aging out, mental health. We have so many priorities there that are just begging to be read and put into some kind of action.
And I think we're going to have to enlist everyone here on Facebook and on the internet to share all these reports with people and really learn what's actually going on. What's coming up? Are you in between now that you're out promoting this current report? Do you already know what's going to be next?
So I think we are in an exciting place where I think we're going to see what priorities we already have that we can go back and refine even more and hit even harder. And then there's always the possibility of doing new ones. So it's definitely this ever-changing and ever-growing thing that happens. It depends on the council that you have. It depends on what's going on in child welfare world. And it's definitely an exciting thing. So I hope people who are listening or who hear about us will follow our journey and really listen to where we go next.
It's interesting, you know. I was told a long time ago when I sort of started in child welfare that whether how quickly a child gets yanked, the word was yanked, how quickly a child gets yanked depends a lot on prevailing politics. And someone said this thing to me that it stuck in my mind because it so totally devastated me. And they said, all it takes is one 6-year-old girl to die to suddenly, you know, turn the entire trend towards immediately yanking children, zero tolerance, you know, into any kind of, you know, that are in any kind of situation that a person can, someone else can report a situation and bang, they'll just come in and yank the child. And I wonder, like, you know, what's your feeling about the way the politics shapes the response of the social workers? Do you have thoughts on that?
I do. I think that
makes me cry when I think about it, you know?
Yeah. Well, and it's really hard because the stories that people hear about who aren't in child welfare world are the ones that are on the news. When the overwhelming majority of kids who come into care are not kids who, as we know, or as from what we know, you know, the kids are coming into care because of overwhelmingly neglect. So most kids are not coming into care because they're being locked in basements and beaten. You know, most kids aren't coming into care because they're being sexually abused every night. That happens. I'm not saying it doesn't happen,
of course,
but that's not, you know, 99%. 99% of parents, I would say, and that's a made-up statistic from my own opinion, do want their children and do want to take care of them. But those same parents often don't have the tools. They weren't, you know, they experienced the system themselves, and so they don't have the tools, the support, or the parenting skills to know how to do it.
Right. Making the child was a good idea at the time. But, you know, then the reality hits them, and I would agree with you there. They just don't have the skill set that's required, and I'm sure that if we could give a percentage of those people that skill set, things would be a lot better for a lot of children. What you do is wonderful, and what I'm going to do is let you go, but I'm going to do that looking forward to the next time you and I get to share information together, because I am absolutely thrilled with this, and I hope you will keep in touch and call into the program frequently and let us know what the council is doing. And meanwhile, I'll be out there spreading the word about all of your good work. How's that sound?
That sounds wonderful. Thank you so much for having me, Greg. It's been a privilege.
Thank you. It's a privilege to have you on. You have a good evening. With our last few minutes remaining, I did have a few things to say about cell phones, but I'm going to go to the opioid epidemic, actually, because this won't take very long, and it's kind of important. Tonight's topic in the opioid epidemic is actually about the difference between OxyContin and fentanyl, because it's important to draw this distinction as we try to ruin the lives of the Sackler family and take the $14 billion that they've basically stolen from the American public. When fentanyl was created as a synthetic opioid, its use was actually restricted to hospitals. And that was mainly because fentanyl, you probably know, is like 10 to 100 times stronger than heroin. And, you know, even something like absorbing it through your skin, like, you know, if you're trying to save someone and you get some on you, can actually cause you to overdose. I remember from my days as a medical writer that there were actually training workshops for physicians, and especially veterinarians, who had to be certified on the correct handling methods of certain kinds of fentanyl delivery systems, because they could be so dangerous just to be handled. Now, OxyContin, which is the creation of the Sackler family, isn't nearly as deadly on face value as fentanyl can be. But the problem is OxyContin was something that was delivered to the public. It wasn't restricted to hospitals. And physicians were misled into thinking that it wasn't habit forming. And they knew it was a total lie. It's synthetic heroin. That's what it is. How could it not be habit forming? But so now listen to how this goes, because in order to perpetuate the lie, there was no titration protocol developed, which is really a fancy word for just a step-by-step process to wean off the drug. So when the drug ran out, people didn't even realize they had been hooked. And they just, continued to feel pain, because that's how you feel when you're hooked on narcotics. And they went out seeking more. So this whole chain of events, started by the Sackler family, put people of all socioeconomic groups and all races out on the street looking for black market OxyContin. And when they found out how expensive black market OxyContin was, then they started to turn to a cheaper source for the same medication. And that cheaper source, of course, is heroin. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Because asshole chemists, I'm not talking about good chemists, I'm talking about evil ones. Asshole chemists, primarily in Mexico and China, were already learning how to synthesize fentanyl. And they made it less expensive than the product that heroin was traditionally cut with, which, if you know anything about heroin, you cut heroin with mannitol, which is baby laxative. I always thought that was a little ironic, since one of the side effects of heroin addiction is constipation. The addicts, heroin addicts all have hemorrhoids. So the irony being that cutting a drug that severe with baby laxative just seemed to be the one nice gesture, in an otherwise absolute ridiculous set of circumstances. But now to save money, dealers started cutting heroin with fentanyl. And there you have, every time that happens, you have the potential for overdose, because the dealers have no idea the strength of the fentanyl that they're working with. They're certainly not chemists. They're just, using it as a means to what they think is dilute the heroin, when in reality they're making it so much stronger. And this is coming from Mexico and China. So basically, to stop the influx of fentanyl, a wall around Mexico won't be enough. We're also going to have to build a wall around China. But that's not the point. The point is that the horrible, scummy Sackler family who started this whole mess, and we should make every effort to take away every single penny that they have. And let's start by using their $14 billion to try to help solve the problem that they themselves have created. And so there it is, ladies and gentlemen, another hour of the Age Out Angels Radio Hour, as we talk about important issues that affect the youth of America. And I want to thank our guest, Nicolee Biddle, this evening. The work that she and her counsel are doing are absolutely fantastic, and I'm going to be sharing that work with you on Facebook, and I want you to share it with your friends. Join me next Thursday at 8 p.m. when my guest in the studio will be Jamira Moore, co-founder of the My Life movement. And so until then, let's make this week be the best week ever. Good night.